Hi everyone and welcome back to my channel. I'm Maisie and this is Maisie with a Z, and today we're going to be doing the mid-year book freakout tag, as well as talking more generally about my reading statistics for the first part of the year and my goals for the rest of it. So the first question on the mid-year book freakout tag is, what's the best book you've read so far this year? So I've pulled out 3 options because I'm indecisive. I can't choose a favorite book ever. So my first choice is Beartown by Frederick Bachman, which is my 4th Bachman book. I had already read Anxious People, A Man Called Uva, and My Grandmother Asked Me to Tell You She's Sorry, the last one being my favorite. And this was honestly possibly my least favorite Bachman book, but that doesn't actually mean anything because I love all of his books so much. If you've not read Frederick Bachman before, go do it. He's amazing. He's an absolute favorite author of mine, and I can't help but recommend his books to everybody. So this is kind of set around this small town where the teenage hockey team is a big part of life. It definitely deals with a lot of sensitive topics, so I'd really recommend looking at trigger warnings before reading it. But it's really good. It's a little heartbreaking, but all of Frederick Bachman's writing is so beautiful and captures humanity so well, and I just really adore it. And that's why this is one of my favorite books of the year. Next up is Priory of the Orange Tree by Samantha Shannon, which, massive book, but I read this in the spring and I absolutely adored it. The story's wonderful and I loved having a sapphic main pairing. I loved all the dragons. I loved the world she created, and it was just, I really adored every second of reading this. If you remotely like fantasy, then read this. It's amazing. I had previously thought I didn't really like standalone fantasy, but actually I think I like standalone fantasy plenty fine when it is this long. And yeah, I just really adore it. I'm hoping to read A Day of Fallen Night later this year, which is the other book set in this world that came out a couple months ago. But yeah, I just really loved Priory of the Orange Tree. It's just really amazing high fantasy. And then the last of my 3 favorite books read so far in 2023 is Under the Whispering Door by TJ Klune, which I talked about in more detail in my June wrap-up, which was my last video, so you can go hear me talk about it there. But this is just a beautiful story about grief and death and what's meaningful in life. And honestly, TJ Klune just never fails. The House in the Cerulean Sea was one of my favorite books of last year, so I was not at all surprised that I adored this book. And yeah, again, I'm not going into too much detail because I talked a lot about it in last week's video. But this is the 3rd book in my favorite book so far of 2023. And then the next question is, what's the best sequel you've read so far in 2023? And there was really no other option than The Ballad of Never After by Stephanie Garber, where, again, I talked about this in great depth in my last video. So if you want to hear me ramble about it for 5 minutes, then you can go look there. But this is the sequel to Once Upon a Broken Heart, and it just is such a lovely and whimsical fantasy, and I love the main characters, I love the world. I truly love everything about it. This also would have been contender for top book so far of 2023, but because there's a question specifically for sequels, then I decided to save this for that. So yes, highly recommend. Go check out my last video if you want to hear more of my thoughts about it. And then the next question is, what's a new release that you haven't read yet but that you want to? And for that, I really can't choose any other answer but Fourth Wing, where I will read it as soon as I can get my hands on a copy of it, which will hopefully be this week. I don't know if it's going to live up to the hype for me, but I really want to see if it does because it sounds a lot like something I would really love, and it's completely taken the book community by storm. So I'm really looking forward to reading that, and hopefully I can soon. The next question is, what is your most anticipated release for the second half of the year? For me, that is definitely A Curse for True Love, which is the 3rd book in the Once Upon a Broken Heart trilogy, and that's coming out September 12th. I am basically just living for that day. It's going to be great. I will probably end up devouring the book the second I get my hands on it, but I just cannot wait for it. Although I will be really sad this trilogy is over, but I can't wait to see what Stephanie Garber does next. So yeah, that's definitely my most anticipated release for the second half of the year. But some runner-ups would definitely be Swordcatcher by Cassandra Clare, which is her first non-Shadowhunters book and I believe her first adult book. as well as The Ashfire King by Chelsea Abdullah, which is the next book in her Sansi trilogy, and The Chalice of the Gods by Rick Riordan, which is going to follow Percy, Annabeth, and Grover, who are the main characters of Percy Jackson and the Olympians. And it's going to be another story about them, and even though it's a total cash grab, I'm super excited for it. And then the next question is, what's the biggest disappointment of the year so far? And for that, there was really only one possible answer, because there were books I didn't like this year, but there was only one that I was really looking forward to and ended up despising, which is My Fine Fellow. Now, this is a gender-bent retelling of My Fair Lady. I don't even know how to describe the setting of this. It's set in this alternate reality version of 1830s England, where I believe Queen Charlotte did not die. She created these schools so girls could learn trade and get jobs, and for whatever reason, the most prestigious one is the culinary school. Henrietta, who's the Henry Higgins equivalent in this, decides to take someone who sells empanadas on the street and teach him to be like a gentleman baker. And meanwhile, her best friend Penelope Pickering is trying to help the boy that she's teaching and gradually developing feelings for him. And this had potential, and I was really looking forward to it because I love My Fair Lady. Like, I absolutely adore it. I love the movie, I love the musical, and I really, really wanted a good adaptation of it. But it really felt like the author took a story that has a lot of nuance about gender and class and societal expectations based on the way you present, and made it very two-dimensional. Penelope and the boy, I don't remember his name is, are like perfect people who can do absolutely no wrong. And then Henrietta Higgins is absolutely the worst person ever. And it's just, there's no nuance, and the world made no sense. And honestly did not feel like the author liked My Fair Lady at all, which makes me question why she wanted to do a retelling of it. Like, I feel like this book could have done some really interesting things, but in doing away with a lot of the nuance of the original story, in making it so two-dimensional, but also how you take Eliza Doolittle as a character and turn her into the most boring, random, personality-less guy you have ever heard of. I don't understand that. I don't understand how you can do that. Like, it's one thing for Pickering to become this like Super Mary Sue-like character because the protagonist is apparently not allowed to have any flaws or anything, but to turn Eliza Doolittle, who is amazing and bold and wonderful, and then turning her into this, I don't understand it. So that's all I have to say about this. I will not be talking about this likely ever again, except for when I finally unhaul it, because I'll be talking about that if I do a video for that. But otherwise, you are unlikely to see this again. I don't recommend. Like, it had so much potential, and the cover is beautiful. It's just, it makes me angry how much of a letdown this book was. So, moving on. Next up is Biggest Surprise so far, and for me that's definitely Loveless by Alice Oseman, where this is another book I talked about in great depth in my previous video about my June wrap-up. But this was my first time reading an Alice Oseman novel, but I had read all of her Heartstopper volumes that are currently out, and I just don't enjoy them that much. I think the characters are super flat, and it could be so much better, but it's not. I don't understand the hype. Like, I understand why people like the super, like, cozy, feel-good aspects of it, but I genuinely do not understand the hype. So I did not go into this book with super high expectations, but because there are so few books with, like, Arrow Ace rep in, like, the YA genre, or even in any genre, then I really did want to give it a try. So I did, and to my surprise, I really enjoyed it. Like, it did still have some, like, flat character problems that I found with Heartstopper, but it was a lot better than I was expecting, and that was definitely a huge surprise. So, again, you can check my previous video for more of my thoughts on that. So next up is Favorite New Author, and for that, I'm going with Chelsea Abdullah, who wrote The Stardust Thief, where I absolutely adored this book. It was almost in the rankings for my top books of 2023, but it just like wasn't quite there with the other three. But this is absolutely amazing fantasy. It has such good found family. It's her debut novel, and you really would not know it from reading it. It is one of the best fantasy books I've read in a long time. And I truly just love the world. I love the characters. I love everything about it. Yeah, I can't recommend it enough. I'm super excited for the rest of the trilogy and to see what else she does with the rest of her career, because this book leaves me with nothing but the highest hopes for it. And then the next question is newest fictional crush, where I couldn't really think of anyone until I was looking through like all the books I'd read so far this year, and I thought of Ned from The Wisteria Society for Lady Scoundrels, where he's the male love interest, and he literally steals a library for Cecilia, who's the main character. For context, she's a pirate and he's an assassin, so the stealing isn't as morally out of place in this world. Giving a library to someone who loves books is absolute ultimate romantic move. So that earned him his place on the spot, I guess. And then next up is newest favorite character, and I could not choose anyone but Seelie, who is the protagonist of Unseelie. This book is building on the fact that changelings in historical mythology were likely an explanation for autistic children. Seelie is a changeling who was switched out for her sister, Isolde, I think that's how you pronounce it, at birth, and then her mother took both of them in. I'm not going to go into too much detail about it, but it's the first fantasy book I've ever read with a female autistic protagonist, and I related to her so much. I cried while reading it, and it was just, like, I just love her. She's amazing and wonderful, and I, like, saw so much of myself in her, and it was really just so good. This is another book that would have possibly been on my favorites list, but it just wasn't, like, quite there, but it was so good, and I love her so much. And the next up is a book that made you cry, and we're going with Under the Whispering Door again, where I don't usually cry at books, but this book really did it for me. It's so lovely, and even though it's not a sad story, there's still definitely heartbreaking moments, and I think that's really what got to me in this. And yeah. Next up is a book that made you happy, and for that I'm going with the Spy Family manga series, which I read the first 2 volumes of this year, and I had already watched all of the anime last year when it came out, but this was my first manga, and I absolutely love it. It gives me, like, so much serotonin. It's just, like, my instant fix for, like, when I'm sad is read this. I just love it. I love found family, and it's just such an absurd story at times, where basically it follows these 3 people who are posing as a family. The father figure is a spy who's trying to infiltrate a private school in order to get close with one of the parents there. So he recruits this girl, Anya, from an orphanage to act as his daughter, and he doesn't know she's actually a telepath, so she can tell everything he's thinking. And then they recruit Yor, who they meet at a clothing shop, to play the mother. And what they don't know is she's secretly an assassin. So she's an assassin, he's a spy, neither of them know that about the other. And then Anya knows that about both of them, but they don't know she's a telepath. And it's just so funny and so good. I can't help but smile when I'm talking about it. I love it. Next up is most beautiful book you've bought or received so far this year, and for that we're going to take a field trip downstairs to my room, so I'll see you there. Okay, so welcome to my fantasy/special edition bookshelf downstairs. So there's a couple of special editions I've gotten this year that I'd like to talk about for this question. The first I'd like to talk about is this copy of Trust of the Emerald Sea, which I received because I was a patron of Brandon Sanderson's Kickstarter last year, and it's just really beautiful. It has, like, that's the second book, The Frugal Wizard's Handbook for Surviving Medieval England, which I don't think is as pretty, and it's got illustrations, it's got these beautiful end papers, and I just really love it. And then the next up are these copies of The Priory of the Orange Tree and A Day of Fallen Night from the Broken Binding, where look like this, and they have sprayed edges with dragons on them. And they also have beautiful foil thing on the cover and quote on the spine. And they're just really gorgeous. Like, I don't usually buy special editions from subscription boxes, but these were just so beautiful, and I loved Pyre the Orange Tree enough that I just absolutely had to have them. See, look how gorgeous that is. And yeah, so those are absolutely stunning. I adore them. And then last up are these 3 books, which I got for my birthday. And they're painted editions of classics, so they have a texture on them that feels like a painting. And they're just so beautiful. There's Persuasion. And there's Little Women, where you can kind of see the texture. And here's Jane Eyre. There are at least 4 for every season, I think. And the summer ones just came out, and they include Anne of Green Gables, which, if you don't know, is one of my favorite books. There's an Anne of Green Gables edition. There's an Anne of Green Gables edition. So I love Anne of Green Gables, and I'm super excited to get that at some point, because they're just stunning. So yeah, those are my 3 most beautiful books, or 3 most beautiful sets of books, I guess, that I've received so far this year. And with that being said, I will see you back upstairs. And the last question is, what books do you need to read by the end of the year? So I'd say the 4 I really need to read are all on my TBR for July, but I'm realistically not going to get to all of them this month at this point, seeing as we're now a little over a third of the way through and I've read none of them. But those are Babel, Chain of Thorns, The Stolen Heir, and The Adventures of Amina Al-Sirafi. Some other books I really want to get to include Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow, A Day of Fallen Night, Us Against You. I'd really like to finish off the rest of Emily Henry's adult romance books. But at this point, I don't really want to say like what books I definitely absolutely need to get through by the end of the year, because my reading mood changes. So I definitely need to get through as much of my TBR as possible, but those are the main books I would really like to read by the end of the year. The last question is, who's your favorite book community member? And for me, that has to be Isabella from Throne of Pages, because her videos are the only thing that got me through the second half of the past school year. Like, they're so calming and have such like a peaceful atmosphere that like her videos were like the high point of my week, and for that she absolutely has to be my favorite book community member so far this year. And yeah, so that wraps up the mid-year book freakout tag. Now I'll be talking about some more like general statistics of what I've read. So as of right now, which is July 11th, I've read 86 books this year. So Storygraph says I'm 20 books ahead of schedule. My original goal was to read 125 books this year, so I'm feeling pretty confident about that. I'm probably going to try and bump it up to 150 books once I hit 125, but we'll see. And those 86 books add up to 32,674 pages, which is an average of about 380 pages per book, which I think is pretty good. Storygraph says my most read genre is romance, which is very unsurprising. It says I've read 43 romance books. And it says my next most read genre is YA, which again makes sense. It says I've read 29 contemporary books and 27 fantasy books, where ideally by the end of the year I would like to have read more fantasy books than contemporary books, just because fantasy books bring me more enjoyment. And the past couple of years I've read more contemporary books just because they're easier reads that require less brain power, but I'd really like to read more fantasy books than contemporary books by the end of this year. So that's a big goal of mine for the next 5.5 months. Of those books, I believe 10 were rereads, so the other 76 were new. And then it says I've read 60% print books and 40% digital books, roughly. I'm not sure how updated I've kept those editions, But if that's true, then I'm pretty happy with that. I had a big problem in 2021 and 2022 where I was reading a ton more digital books than I was reading physical books. So my physical TBR was not going down at all because I was entirely reading digital books. So I'm happy to see that I'm reading more print books this year, and I'm hoping to increase that even more because I'd really like to be able to get through my physical TBR, or at least significantly reduce it. And then my most read authors are Sarah J. Maas, Jennifer L. Armentrout, and Jenny Han, all of whom I've read 3 books by, where my guess is Sarah J. Maas will definitely be my most read author this year, unless I decided to do An Impulsive, Rick Riordan, or Shadowhunters, or Marissa Meyer reread, but I don't think that's likely, so Sarah J. Maas will likely be my most read author, just because I want to try and get through all her books by the time Crescent City 3 comes out, so really gonna have to step up my game there. And then I've read at least 11 books every month this year, which I'm really happy with. Again, the past several years, I've had some months where I would read like only 5 books, and then other months where I'd read like 20 books, and I don't think that was a good balance. So this year, every month, I've read between 11 and 17. And I feel like that's a good place for me, where I'm reading consistently enough to be happy and read enough books, but I'm not obsessively reading and getting through like 20 plus books in a month. So I think that's a good balance for me. My average star rating so far this year is 4.03, which is really good. It says I read 24 5-star reads, although I think a really large portion of those were the rereads. Every book I reread was 5 stars, except for The Summer I Turned Pretty, which definitely was not 5 stars. Whereas I reread that because I binge read the entire trilogy in like one weekend in January because I wanted to give it a go even though I knew I wasn't gonna like it. Which is weird because To All the Boys I Loved Before is one of my favorite YA contemporary books of all time. I love that trilogy. But The Summer I Turned Pretty, I cannot tell it's by the same author. But anyway, it probably leaves my number of 5-star reads somewhere in the teens, which I'm happy with so far. And then 9 4.5-star books and 27 4-star books, which I feel like is pretty good. And then there's a mix of 2, 2.5, 3, and 3.5-star books. No 1-star books or half-star books, because I don't really do that, because if I hate a book enough that I would give it a 1 star, I'm just going to DNF it. There's no way I could possibly drag myself through that just to finish it. That's not happening. So yeah, those are all my reading stats so far this year. I think it's been a really good reading year so far for me. I'm really happy with my progress, where I'm 20 books ahead of schedule for reading 125 books in the year. And again, as I said before, I'll probably aim to actually do 150 because that should be plenty doable. My main goals for the rest of the year are to get through my physical TBR as much as possible, which means limiting the amount of ebooks, library books, etc. that I read, because I'd really like to get through my piles of unread books that I own first. Beyond that, I would really like to read Anna Karenina, and I'd really like to read my last 2 Jane Austen books, which are Emma and Mansfield Park. Those are probably my main goals. And as I said earlier, I'd really like to end the year having read more fantasy than contemporary. That's about it. I'd really like to be able to keep posting consistently on here, so that's another goal, as well as post consistently on Bookstagram and semi-regularly on my blog. We'll see how that goes. Oh, and also I would like to catch up on my NetGalley reviews, because there are a large amount of books that I've gotten from there that I have read and not reviewed, or alternatively, that I have not read. So catching up on that is going to be a goal, where I think I'm going to dedicate a video to that in a month or 2. So yeah, that's my 2023 mid-year book freakout tag plus general wrap-up. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please like, comment, and subscribe. And yes, I will see you later.